Good morning, and we are live, Coffee with Rich, on a Friday, February the 5th. Good morning and welcome. My name is Rich Brown, your host this morning for Coffee with Rich. I am the co-founder and co-host of the American Warrior Society and the American Warrior Show, America's #1 self-defense podcast. This morning, I am joined by Jake. Jake is with Tier 3 Tactical, and I'm really excited to have Jake on the show. And I'm getting all the notifications on my phone that we're live. So that's really cool. If you're just joining me on the live Coffee with Rich here on our Facebook channel, good morning and welcome. If you're watching us in a replay, that's awesome too. And if you're listening to us in a podcast to come, we appreciate you this morning. Let me get set up before I introduce Jake to you guys and let him tell you a little bit about himself. But also let's get the sponsor out of the way. Sponsors Appalachian Standard, applehemp.com, makers of the finest CBD products that you can get. Jesse and I were in the Marines together. Him and his wife are growing some amazing hemp there in the Appalachian Mountains of Asheville, North Carolina. Please check them out, applehemp.com. Use AWS15 for 15% off your orders. Heck, check out the AmericanWarriorShow.com, and you can find all of our amazing sponsors and pick up some really cool products. Let's see if I can find us here. There we are. Okay. We got folks joining us this morning. Let's see who's on. Gerald is on, coin number 952. Sid is on. Good morning, Sid. Please like and share. Got Jake from Tier 3 Tactical. Good morning, Jake.
Good morning, Rich. How you doing?
I'm doing better than I deserve.
That's right.
Hey, tell us a little bit about yourself, Jake, and how you ended up here on Coffee with Rich this morning.
Yeah, sure. Well, basically, I tricked some guy named Rich into letting me come on his show, but that's the short of it. Just a little bit about myself. Grew up in the Midwest, and did Midwest things, are kind of a rural area, and then joined the Marine Corps after college, which is something obviously we have in common. And I was in the Marine Corps from, I guess, it's getting up there now. So it's been about 2009 to 2013, something like that. And then got out of that, did a little bit of contracting. And now I'm currently a law enforcement officer in Virginia. And I run a website called Tier 3 Tactical, where we talk about, functional fitness, tactical training, equipment, things like that.
Yeah. So in the Marine Corps, what did you do?
My primary MOS or job specialty, if you don't speak military, was ground intelligence officer. That is kind of a one you don't hear a lot because it's kind of a weird job, and there's just not a lot of just not that many billets for it. So generally speaking, a ground intelligence officer either does two things. They're the intelligence officer for whatever unit they are, whether that's an infantry battalion or whatever. And if that's your job, you're just answering questions for the boss. What's the enemy doing? Can I cross this bridge with my tanks? That kind of stuff. And then the secondary job is to run reconnaissance elements for whatever unit, whether that's a scout sniper platoon or a recon platoon or something like that. So it's kind of a mix between infantry officers and intelligence officers, because we do in fact have to go through both schools, infantry officers course and the intel schools as well. So I like to say that I can eat crayons and I can also do PowerPoint. That's the general overview of that MOS.
Sweet. Yeah, that's one I didn't realize until talking to you, that you guys have to go through is it IOC?
Yeah.
Infantry officers course. That's a pretty tough course from what I hear.
Yeah, it sure is. And it's funny, at the time, you're so young and you're just like, this is like pretty normal. But then like halfway through, they're like, never try to do this with your Marines. You'll get fired. I'm like, wait a minute. Then why are you doing it to us?
Yeah, that's what they do. JD is on. Good morning, JD. PJ Tahoe out there in California. Good morning. John is on. Miss Betty is on. Good morning. Please like and share. You're definitely going to want to check this out. We've got a lot of cool stuff to talk about this morning. As you can tell, Jake brings a wealth of information. So why did you join the Marine Corps? How did that end up happening?
Well, during college, I'd kind of like considered like joining the real world and getting a job. And just to be honest, like the prospect of going to an office job just did not appeal. I also really liked psychology, which is what my degree is in. Um, and if you don't necessarily want to go do clinical psychology or a few other things, there's not really a whole lot to do with a bachelor's degree in psychology. And I'd always kind of thought about joining law enforcement. And then I was like, I don't know. I kind of like the military. And at the time, the Marine Corps had a good program where you essentially do OCS, Officer Candidate School, during your junior summer. So you get that out of the way, you get your degree, and then you go through the rest of your training pipeline, whatever that may be. And that really appealed to me because I kind of didn't want to do the ROTC thing. I wanted to have kind of a normal college experience and then be able to have a job afterwards that I thought was good. So did that, really enjoyed it, and then went from there. And it was kind of a different time in the for us as a country too. That was Iraq and Afghanistan was still actually a thing, and you would still see things on the news about it, and you don't see anything like that anymore.
When did you go to TBS?
That would have been, I started October of 2009. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see who's on. American Warrior Society is on. That can only mean one thing. Mr. Mike Seeklander is on, and I'm sure he's going to encourage you guys to like and share. Donald Green is on, a fellow Devil Dog. Good morning, Donald, from Virginia as well. Coin number 1376. TC Fuller says crayons. Talk about crayons. TC, of course, was an Army officer and retired FBI agent. Jeff Brown is on this morning. Good morning, Jeff. Yeah, I don't know how I went through TBS in 2003, of course, the warrant officer variety.
Yeah.
And I don't know how it is now, but they called it the body softener back then for a reason.
It still is the body softener. There's a lot of time out in the field, a lot of MREs eaten, and not as much PT as you would like.
No, man, I checked in there. For those who don't know what we're talking about, the basic school is where it's a six-month course for young second lieutenants, and for warrant officers, it was a 4-month course. And you would think, okay, I'm going to become this is where I get really polished. They polish the stone, teach you how to be a Marine Corps officer, and it's not a fork and knife school by any stretch. And a lot of the time, like you said, is out in the field doing land nav again and again and again.
Fighting those dang red boxes.
I know. But the funny thing was, I got to the gym and me and my buddy were going to work out, and there's like there's a shake weight in there, and I'm being facetious, but there was like 2 or 3 things, and there's nowhere to work out there. It was just insane. I couldn't believe it.
I could say they have done some improvements to it, but I was there the other day. I was going to the FBI portion of Quantico, and I was like, I could barely recognize the facility. I mean, they've completely redone it down there. I'd probably get lost if I went there looking for something now.
Well, thank God, man. It definitely needed it. Brett is on from Southern California, coin number 876. If you want to find out what a coin number is, please check out AmericanWarriorSociety.com. Terry is on. Lydia is on. Good morning. So you mentioned in your bio that you played rugby at Purdue. What was that like? How'd you get into that?
That was just that was more or less, I would say, peer pressure from my friends. Some of them played rugby in high school, and they're like showing me a couple of YouTube videos. I'm like, yeah, I can play this. This looks like fun. And so I went to Purdue University, if anyone cares, and they have a pretty decent team. And so I joined the team and played rugby pretty poorly. But I had a lot of fun, and the parties were always good. So I wasn't by no means a great rugby player because I played it for a few years, but it is fun. I still do watch the occasional game.
Did you play any in the Marine Corps?
No, I didn't really do that. I kind of stopped by the time I was getting ready to go in the Marine Corps because, I mean, if you've ever watched rugby, while it's safer than football, there's still a pretty high risk that you're going to get injured. And I was like, I don't really want to spend a year redoing a lot of this training or missing deployments because I have to get knee surgery or something like that. So I kind of stopped it after college, but yeah, I had considered it or some of the men's clubs, but it's just like at that point I was like, I got other priorities.
Yeah. My cousin was a Marine also and on a semi-pro rugby team. And of course he snapped his femur in half and another buddy of mine just ripped his shoulder to shreds and never was right again. So yeah. So Jake, I wanted to talk to you because as a former Marine Corps officer, as a current law enforcement officer, you've used state-sanctioned violence professionally. And I would ask you, sir, in your opinion, what is violence?
I mean, the best answer I could come up with for that kind of question is it's just a means to an end. In and of itself, it's not good or bad. It's just what are you doing it for? And, society and cultures have different, they've got different strictures and different norms and laws that govern that. And, if you go to a different country around the world, it's okay to kill somebody for, insulting you. But if you do that here, you're going to have a one-way ticket to a gray bar hotel. So, it's just a means to an end, and it is different. I do see this a lot online because I have a lot of friends, online that are cops, and I have a lot of folks who are still in the military, and I wish people would stop confusing the two. They are not the same, and I know some of my cop friends are going to be like butthurt about this, but like, you're not a warrior. Like, that's not your job. Your job is a little bit different, and I'd say probably a little bit harder, because in the Marine Corps, like when you're deployed, like, yeah, there are rules you can do, but you've got a lot of latitude. And guess what? Like I remember during all this stuff in this summer, folks are talking about, like, one of my Marine Corps friends was like, you know what? Marines are way better trained use of force. They would never, shoot somebody that shouldn't have been shot or whatever. Like that. I was like, bro, I remember people returning fire at bushes at 1,000 yards. Like, you didn't even know if anyone was there. You're just like suppressing everything. Like, you can't do that in the U.S. So I don't know what planet you're on, but no, those two things are different. And I think it's just a means to an end, Rich.
No, I think you're right, man. And I'm surprised a Marine would say that, because I have cleared buildings with frag grenades, not knowing who or what was inside of there.
Well, that is exactly what you're supposed to do by doctrine. I tell people that all the time, that, because I hear this a lot too. Militarization of police. And I was like, please describe what that is. I was like, in the Marine Corps, doctrinally, I'm supposed to clear a building by throwing a frag grenade and then going inside it and just machine gunning whatever's in there. I was like, you think anybody in the U.S. is doing that? No, not happening.
No, it's not happening. And, we had during Desert Storm, there was, I think Fox Company shot up this white sedan as it was rolling through their paws, and at first everybody's like, oh my God, you just killed, because they're in civilian attire, just killed 4 dudes. And then a cursory check of what was in the trunk of the car showed that they were Iraqi officers, and they were, changed clothes and were trying to escape. So it was a good shoot, but at first it's like, oh man, this is not good.
There's going to be some questions asked.
Yeah. TC says, "Hey, Phil Strader's on. Good morning, Phil. How we grace us with your presence, sir. Good to have you on." It says, "Good morning, Rich. Your face makes me happy. Yours as well, sir." TC says, "Marines playing rugby in Indiana. That sounds just brutal." I'm sure it was.
Yeah.
Alan, good morning. He says, coin number 1571 from occupied Virginia. Alan Kelly, of course, is a retired Virginia State Police officer. Good morning, Alan. Jeffrey Young says, good morning, Rich, Jake, and all the AWS members. Coin number 1614. We're just getting started, folks. Jake from Tier 3 Tactical, former Marine Corps officer and law enforcement officer. One of the things you kind of touched on, and I want to really dig into a little bit, is, you said something like violence isn't necessarily right or wrong. It's just a means to an end. So in that context, are you saying that it's morally ambiguous?
Yeah, I mean, the reasons matter, and that's one of the things, especially with everything that's happened this summer, and the scrutiny that's on police, and I don't necessarily disagree with the scrutiny that should be on police, because you should expect that in this profession. But the problem is nobody asks why something happened. They just see something and they're like, that's hard to watch. I don't like it. It must be bad. And that's the problem. And I see this a lot with new prosecutors, with folks that just don't deal with criminal justice things. I mean, if you have to use force, let's say the scenario is you're 100% justified to use force, he's beating up a nun or something like that. Like, if you go beat some guy up and you're to stop him from hurting some like nun or something like that, it still doesn't look nice. You're punching some guy, or you're tackling him to the ground and you're putting him in handcuffs. Like, that doesn't look nice. And that's the lowest level use of force, apart from me just telling someone to stop doing something. So if you continue to escalate, whether that's a tool on your belt or it's an officer involved shooting, it doesn't look nice. And that's that has nothing to do with how legal it is or how justified it was in people's eyes. But people understandably have a hard time watching something like that and going like, that seems fine to me, and I really don't expect most folks with no experience to understand that, but I wish they would ask like why that happened. And then, what are some of the rules that covers use of force? Because people don't seem to ask that. They're just like, well, these crazy people they're going overboard. I'm like, but you're not asking any of the right questions to determine whether that's okay or not.
Yeah, context is important. And like you said, any use of force is probably going to look bad. Like you said, even if I'm yelling at you and maybe cursing at you, and again, for those of you watching Coffee with Rich this morning or listening to it on a podcast, curse words may not be a part and parcel of your vernacular, but I can promise you this, that criminals in our society, they use them like punctuation marks. So if you see a law enforcement officer on a video and he isn't calling this gentleman sir every 15 seconds and he's using some foul language, that, like you said, is probably the lowest level of force, and it is not going to get any better from there.
Nope. Well, the other thing, Rich, too, and I've asked people that, we have ride-alongs from time to time, and just folks that, find out I'm a police officer and want to ask me questions, or what do I think about X, Y, and Z issue going on. And the thing is, I ask them, like, how often do you think I use force when I arrest somebody? Like, what percentage of the time? And they're like, probably 80%, 50%. I'm like, try less than one. You know what I mean? If you're using force that much, you're going to be fired immediately. Like, nobody does that. And if some officer's like, yeah, I use force like most of the time when I arrest people, I'll be like, okay, well, expect some investigations then, because that's not normal. The vast majority of those kind of things are, you tell somebody like, hey, you shouldn't have stole that, turn around, put your hands behind your back, and that's it, But that's not going to make the news. No one cares to hear about things occurred how they should have occurred. No one's going to listen to that.
Yeah, I would have almost flipped the script on that one and say 100% of the time, because just your officer presence is a compelling factor in force, right? Isn't it step one on the use of force continuum? So you can make while it's not physical force, it is a use of force, me just showing up in a uniform, right?
Yep, it certainly is. And then that's one of the things where sometimes it works for you and sometimes it works against you. You're trying to get an honest answer out of somebody, like, they're not going to tell me the truth now. So it's a waste of time. But sometimes it does help you out and maybe calms things down where people don't want to be doing stuff in front of someone who's, they are a professional capacity.
Yeah. Elke is on. He says, hi, Jake, another power user of Coffee Mate. I see the pump on the shelf behind you.
Don't look at my Coffee Mate pump covetously, okay? I'm watching you guys.
PJ says, I think a lot of people LARPing their lives away are conditioned to the depiction of violence in movie and video games. Although graphic, it is essentially choreographed. Violence in real life is messy and ugly if done right. What say you?
That is exactly right. And that's the problem. And I will reach back a long, long way to my psychology degree here. And there's a thing called habituation, where if I, whatever kind of stress it is, whether that might be like an annoying noise or I just turn the heat up in the room, if I gradually do that, you'll get used to a crazy amount of that stimulus. So, I might start that noise really low, but eventually if I slowly creep it up, it's going to be pretty loud, where anybody who just comes into that room is going to be like, wow, this is super annoying. How are you sitting here? And that's the same thing with use of force. And that's one thing people really don't understand is, if I'm like, hey, sir, calm down, and this guy's like off the rails, like swinging 2x4s at people, or he's got a weapon or something like that, like that's going to take longer. He's going to habituate to a lower level of force. And then if I go through every single step up to there, it's actually going to be worse. That person's going to end up more injured. It's going to take longer. I'm going to probably be more injured, and so are my partners. So that's actually worse. What differentiates someone who's good at that and someone who's not is they will pick the appropriate level that's likely to stop it immediately, and then nothing more than that. But it's just like it's the same thing as disciplining your children. If your children are running out in the street, you don't be like, come on, Larry, like, don't do that. That's not good. Like, you have to spank them sometimes, then they don't do it again. You pick the right thing that'll stop it right then and there. You don't go through like every single step that may or may not work. You have to just use a little bit of experience and judgment and go from there.
I like that. I think that's a really, I like the way you describe that. And I have, like most Marine officers, I have a degree in social psychology, another useless degree, but hey.
It's good. I like social psychology. It's fun to study. So
yeah, it gets it done. Mike is on. Mike Varley, he says, good morning. Coin number 1122 up in Michigan. Elke says, I never get used to my wife talking too much. Yeah, I hear you, pal. Let's see. So tell me about Tier 3 Tactical, Jake. How'd you end up creating that business?
Well, I mean, and I used to listen to a lot of Tim Ferriss podcast, and he always part of it. I think one of his sponsors was, like Bluehost or something like that. So I was like, and he would always that was his thing. He'd be like, oh, you should start a podcast. You have something to say, whatever. And I was like, there probably aren't a lot of people with some of the experience I have. And so I was like, I like, fitness. I like, I've been doing CrossFit for a long time. I like tactical training and that kind of stuff. So I was like, I just start writing about it. And I kind of thought maybe I would eventually turn it into a business. But it basically just started out as something fun to write about, things that I thought were interesting and things that I like to look into. And I was like, well, I might as well share these things with other people that are interested in them. And, along the way, it turns out, a decent amount of folks are interested in that kind of stuff. And it went from there. But I'd say the website's probably, it's more heavily fitness stuff, but there's also a fair amount of self-defense. I like to look for data that's hard to find, because a lot of times especially in the self-defense industry, it's just anecdotes and one time I saw this happen. You're like, but that doesn't matter. That a good story, but that's not really going to help somebody defend themselves, or maybe that doesn't mean we should train that way. So I try to look for things like that. And there's a surprising amount of data that if you're willing to spend some time looking at it and thinking about it, that's actually fairly useful that you can get into.
Yeah. And Jake has been a guest on our podcast before, and he's actually written for our website, AmericanWarriorSociety.com. So if you want to check out some of Jake's articles, you can find them there. And I believe one of the first ones you wrote for us was we have a Warrior One fitness program.
Mm-hmm.
And that Jake Signs and the guys over at Atomic Athlete down in Austin, Texas, put together with Mike Seeklander. And the intent was it was a shooting and fitness program. So check that out if you're a member on the Training Vault. But your article, if I remember correctly, was post Warrior One. What do you do beyond that, right?
Well, I looked at Atomic Athlete and Jake Signs' programming, and it's pretty good. So I think the takeaway there is you have to be named Jake to do good fitness programming. But no, it's really good. It's obviously clearly biased towards folks who, either don't have gym equipment or new to the gym, and the type of programming he does is very good. You're not going to get injured, and you're still going to get in great shape. But for folks that, just like anything, I think a lot of folks that like AWS like to continue on down that path. And that's kind of step one. And so eventually, you're going to, just like, mentioned habituation earlier, that works for fitness too. If you just keep doing the same things over and over again, at some point you stop responding and you don't get any further benefit really. So you need a little bit more stimulus there. So I've added in some basic movements, basic lifts and things like that. So you can kind of continue post that. So that was the goal, is to give them something else to work towards if they either had some gym experience and could do the lift safely, or they just wanted to keep working on their fitness.
Yeah, it's really good stuff, man. And again, like you said, a lot of what you do, whether it's on self-defense or it's fitness related, one of the things I've always respected about you is, again, it's all data driven and pretty scientific. It's not necessarily anecdotal, and I can definitely appreciate that. Will Parker.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, let me welcome Will Parker, retired naval officer. Good morning, Will. Coin number 800 out there in Montana. Tiny is on. Good morning, Semper Fi, brother. Checking in late, he says. Guile from the Philippines is on. Good morning, Guile. Says, good morning, Rich. Good morning, Jake. Good morning, folks. 30 folks joining us live. Please like and share this content. We are just getting started. And Jake, I'm sorry, sir, I cut you off.
I can't remember what I was going to say, so carry on.
Carry on with the plan of the day, huh?
That's right.
Yeah. So you got into CrossFit. For those of you that don't know, man, there are a lot of cult members in the Marine Corps that worship at the altar of CrossFit, man. And it was sometimes it could just drive me absolutely bonkers, to be honest with you.
So you're saying you want me to talk to you about CrossFit? Have you considered doing CrossFit, Rich? Let me tell you about it a little bit.
All right, guys, listen, take care. I'm out of here.
No, it's good. I actually started way back in the day. I think 2007 or something like that to get ready for OCS. So, and it did work very well for that. But yeah, it's been interesting because a lot of folks have, been doing it maybe a year or two or even less. So they kind of see how it is now, but it's changed a whole lot. I mean, I used to tell people, like, when I have, because I also coach at a gym up here locally, and when folks walk in, it's like, now you're like trying to do your best to make them feel welcome, and you scale the workout so they can get a good workout, but they're not, feeling miserable. But I remember when I started, it was like, let's see if we can make this guy vomit in like under 2 minutes, like do our best to make it miserable and see if he'll quit, So I was like, things have changed a lot.
Yeah, I'll tell you a quick CrossFit story, because I mean, I really have I wouldn't say an axe to grind, because I think that CrossFit is an amazing tool. My problem more is with the cult following that at least it had back in the day. I don't know if it still is to this regard, but we had one of our commanders was a major. He was probably a really good dude, but he come on recruiting duty, and I was the basically the operations officer for the Southeast, and he was one of the commanders. And he's like, Rich, I'm going to try CrossFit. We're going to do it. I said, okay, sir. Well, good luck with that. I think it's going to improve our IST scores at Parris Island, which is the initial strength test that all the new recruits have to take as soon as they arrive on Parris Island. Okay, sir. Well, we've done some data on that. Center for Naval Analysis has done data on that, and there's really no causal link between these kind of things, but go ahead, wear yourself out. It'd be interesting to get a few months worth of data so we can get a trend line going and see if this works. And what I will tell you is that he took CrossFit for 3 years and drove his command off a cliff.
Yeah.
He bought tractor trailer loads worth of that equipment. I don't think when I visited his command, I never saw a Marine in uniform. They just walked around in CrossFit attire. And so at the end of it, the colonel was like, hey, Rich, I want you to go down there and kind of do a investigation. I'm like, does the major know I'm coming? He's like, nope.
Surprise.
Yep. So he came in the office this morning, and there I am taking pictures of his office and making copies. And he's like, Rich, what's going on? I'm like, hey, sir, I don't know. You got to call the colonel. And so I briefed him before I left, and he said, well, what do you think of my command? I said, I think the first thing that needs to be done, sir, is get some tractor and trailers in here and get this crap out of here, and let's go back to being a Marine Corps recruiting command. How does that sound? He did not like me. But I have to say, I have to give him credit for just sticking with the program, even though he saw his trend line do like that.
Well, the problem with that is, and I tell people this all the time, because I do, one of the things that I do a little differently on Tier 3 Tactical is traditionally CrossFit releases a workout of the day the night before, and you do it. You don't know what it is, and it's random, which is a whole other problem. And nobody else trains that way for a reason. Like when I write a program, I give you the whole program. You can see what you're going to be doing. You can see how it changes each week, and there's a rhyme to it. You can't train completely randomly and expect results. It will work for a while if you're detrained, but after a year, you just don't get anything from it. You have to have a plan. You can't do anything. It'd be like going to college and be like, I just read random books and hopefully I'll have an engineering degree one day. Like, it doesn't work that way. And that's the other thing with CrossFit. If you're looking at IST or specific military test or just any, if you want to run a marathon or a 5K, like CrossFit is not the best plan for that. It is a good plan to get you to be able to do anything okay. Like, you'll be able to run a little bit. You'll be pretty strong. You can do the lifts. You'll be fairly coordinated. But, like, if you're trying to run a marathon, and I get people saying this all the time, like, what plan do you have to run a marathon? Like, none. Like, go get a marathon plan. Like, go to a running coach and get a marathon plan. Like, I can give you a plan that will keep you strong, and lifting is important even for marathon runners. But, like, you gotta train for the test. You can't just train for everything and then hope the test is going to be like no problem. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and he I guess superficially it made sense what he was attempting to do. But again, once he saw a year's worth of data and the trend line going the way it was going, I think I probably would have, adjusted fire. But he did not. His kids, before they got to Parris Island, were getting broken. A lot of kids didn't want to come to the monthly pool function and get hazed and stuff like that. So it was counterproductive in a whole lot of ways. Not that CrossFit is bad, but to your point, I ran a marathon, and it wasn't with CrossFit. Like I said, I bought a book, I got a plan, I executed the plan, had a successful run. But
no, and that's the problem. And I spend a lot of time. I get a lot of questions and comments on the website about that. I want to do X, Y, or Z, and it's like, and I do write a lot of programs for different stuff. Like if you want to be a strong guy, but also do some CrossFit, great. I got a program for that. That's fine. Or if you want to do bodybuilding, but don't want to huff and puff walking upstairs, like, yeah, I can help you out with that. Or if you do want to run and do CrossFit, that's fine. Because we have a lot of folks that do that kind of stuff. But it's just like anything. You have to have a plan. And if you know how to set up a reasonable plan, it's not hard. You can accomplish those goals, but you can't just do workouts of the day and hope that that's going to get you there. Like hope is not a good plan. You can there's a little bit of science to it. We've done some studies, you can put together a plan that's going to pretty much guarantee you're going to get there.
Yeah. Excellent point. So like a couple of years ago, I ran a Spartan Beast, and it was a kick in the teeth, but in order to do that, if you don't know how to climb a rope, you got to learn how to climb a rope, right? You got to learn how to scale an 8-foot wall. You're going to have to learn how to throw the spear and all the stuff that they do, not just to be competitive, but just to have a chance at finishing the thing. So,
yeah.
Let's see here. We got some comments. Ruben, good morning, sir. He says, I'm so glad the dogs woke me up to make sure I got my weekly cup of Rich Brown coffee with AWS. TC Fuller says, Rich does look a lot like Matt Frazier. I don't know about that, pal.
Well, they're now both officially retired, so maybe that's what he's talking about.
Well, Rich Froning lives about 30 minutes from me, in all seriousness, and he was a CrossFit champ for years and years. Jara says, good morning, Warriors. Phil says, as a fitness expert, what is your opinion of Mike Seeklander ordering XL shirts with medium sleeves?
I can 100% approve of that tactic. Okay, most of fitness is just looking good for Instagram. It has nothing to do with actually being healthy or strong or good at running or anything like that. It's just looking good. So if that makes you look better on Instagram, you're now fitter. That's all you need.
True, very true. Elke says, how do you come up with this stuff? Mike Marley says, off the wall. Yeah. Hey, thanks for joining us this morning. So I think in your bio, you mentioned you used to be a fat kid and you got into fitness. Is that correct?
Yeah, I used to be a chubby kid. Apparently ice cream for breakfast is not like a good thing for your health or not being fat. So I did that. I started out with bodybuilding movements and stuff like that, and had some success. And then I found CrossFit and I really liked it. It works well if you aren't crazy about it. If you use it in moderation and you think about what you did. So when I was getting ready for the Marine Corps, I knew there was a lot of body weight movements. I knew there was a lot of running. So I would do CrossFit and then I would go run, so I would work on things that I needed to work on and stuff like that. And I actually had a lot better success with that. And I see a lot of folks that I think can benefit more from CrossFit style training necessarily. You don't necessarily have to go to a CrossFit gym, but people leave a lot of holes in their fitness, and that's okay. If you want to just do bodybuilding, and that's fine. There's no judgment there. But if you want to do other things, you can. You don't have to be limited by just I only do bodybuilding, so I'm never going to be good at running. You can do both. There was a video of a guy, I think his name is Adam Klink or something. He's a pretty good CrossFit athlete. He did a 500-pound back squat, and then a couple hours later ran a 4:58 miles. So you wouldn't normally put those two things together, but they can be done with enough training and the right parents.
Yeah. Well, I will say CrossFit is an incredible thing for a functional athlete, just an all-around thing. I think that unless you're doing, like you said, one of the problems I always had is this is the WOD. We're doing Fran for the 50th time, or we're doing whatever. Okay, well, great. Well, what is my programming goal? Because nobody's asked me yet.
Oh,
What am I?
that is the real problem, is because people often have specific goals. They don't just walk into the gym being like, I want to be generally fit. Like, no one says that. So they're like, I want to lose weight, or I want to get stronger, or gain some, whatever it is, and that does change how you're going to do it. I mean, if you've never walked into a gym, any program will work. And I tell this all the time. I get people like have specific questions like, should I do a front squat or a back squat? Or if I change it from 78% to 80, is that going to like ruin the whole plan? Like, no, like that stuff doesn't matter. The stuff that matters is consistency. Like, you could have a crappy plan, but if you did it religiously, you would get way better results than me coaching you every day and giving you all the best nutrition advice and you not following any of it. Like, it doesn't matter. It's the you doing the work matters, not the details of the plan.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. So how did you come up with the name Tier 3 Tactical?
I would like to think that there was like a really good, cool, like reason behind it, but not really. I was just like, this kind of sounds nice. I like fitness and tactical training and gear. That's 3 things. So I'll just go with that. Like, it wasn't like any great business decision. I think, I don't know if I would have picked the same name now, but, I'm stuck with it. And it's easy to say. And I don't know. It's just kind of something like that. I don't know if I had any really great reason to pick that name.
So you're a law enforcement officer in Virginia, and, Virginia's had some really serious issues with the Second Amendment lately, man. What's going on up there?
Well, that's a good question. There's a lot of issues with the Second Amendment, and I think the problem is people aren't thinking about these issues in the right way. They fall into these camps, and they will not look at it from any other perspective. And I'll put it to you that any reasonable person would agree that there should be some gun laws. And I'll give you an example where most everybody can agree. Okay, you've murdered somebody and you're now in prison. Should you have the right to carry a gun in prison, serving a sentence for murder? No, you shouldn't. Like, that wouldn't work. Anybody with common sense would point out you probably shouldn't allow prisoners who are violent to have handguns. That's probably a decent thing. And I think even on the other side, I don't think anybody who's reasonable should say nobody should have the ability to defend themselves or go hunting or use them for recreation. So the real problem and the real question is not should there be gun laws, or is everything an infringement or whatever. It's what gun laws should there be. And the problem is I think a lot of the gun laws, especially in Virginia, are getting passed. And I wish there was some kind of mechanism to track these laws and their efficacy afterwards. That's the problem, is you might be able to make a case that XYZ gun law is a good gun law. If it like cut suicides and homicides in half, like, maybe it's worth it. But if you don't even know if it had any effect, then why are you passing laws that you can't say are doing anything? No business operates that way. No person thinks that way. I'll just try this and we'll see what happens. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And there's no mechanism after the fact to determine whether that was useful or not. And I think that's the biggest problem. And the other problem is they just leave gun laws on the books that they're not helping anybody.
Yeah, very true. It's what's strange to me is, Virginia was always a very gun friendly state. And yet overnight, it seemed like it was always lost. And that was just really shocking to me, and maybe somewhat of a cautionary tale for the rest of the country of how much you can lose in one election cycle.
Yeah. I mean, if you elect enough folks that believe the same way you do, I mean, that's what's going to happen. And personally, I don't really care much for either political party because I don't see much of a difference, really. When you look at the data about what they do, the money they spend, the things that they pass, they're just doing the same things and saying different reasons why they're doing it. So I don't really particularly care for any of it. But yeah, some of that stuff is, I just don't, I think most of the time when you get into legal analysis for use of force or the legality of laws, it comes down to, is there a legit governmental interest for passing this law, which is, why you can't scream fire in a crowded theater and, things like that. But if you can't even demonstrate there's a good benefit from these things you're trying to do, then I don't know why you're trying to do it. And unfortunately, the last couple of years, there's been a lot of laws like that. I mean, you look at like the Brady bill that it passed in the 90s. I mean, there's no evidence that really helped. And the problem is that people don't really understand the problem of gun violence. If you look, the problem of gun violence isn't the gun, it's the place and the people that are in those situations. Like poor areas, regardless of whatever you look like, are going to be violent areas. Like that's just how it is. There's less opportunity. It's easier to find a gun and do some crime. And the sad part is especially in some of those inner city areas or rural areas that are very poor, you can get away with that. That's sort of a lifestyle. You just, I mean, I run into people that, like, I arrested a guy once. He had a rap sheet going back to before I was born, and he was still just stealing stuff at Home Depot and doing whatever he was doing, you know. And it's like, to him, getting arrested or facing those consequences, that's just like carrying costs for his lifestyle. He's like, I'm gonna have to deal with it at some point, but I'm gonna keep doing this stuff. And so you can't really fix a violent problem by trying to get rid of the tools. You have to fix the areas that are violent, but that's a hard problem, and people don't want to deal with that.
No, they don't. And I think it goes back to, in some ways, for me, I think there's a misunderstanding for the purpose of the Second Amendment.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, why do you really need guns? I mean, what? And I think Obama made a very disparaging remark about those of us living in the Bible Belt, you know, something along the lines of they cling to their religion and their guns. And I'm like, you don't get it, man.
Yeah.
You're missing the point. Let's see here. Phil Strader says, I'm trying to figure out why my shirts are coming with medium lower half and they're getting smaller and smaller. TC says the efficacy of laws can be studied and shown. It's simply not being done.
Yeah. I think, honestly, any new law passed, there should be an addendum that funds a study that looks at it over a year or two or whatever time frame you want. And if it's not proven to do something, if it doesn't meet the intent of the law, then you have to get rid of it. There's no point in leaving laws on the books that help no one. I mean, look at the federal laws. There's so many laws that, like, people don't even know how many there are, including like FBI agents and stuff like that. It's like you have to have like, you know, hours of study just to determine if someone's violated a law. And it's like, I don't know if you need to have laws like that if you can't immediately determine that with some reasonable time frame that they've been violated.
There was a study, and I'm going to, somebody told me, let me back up. I never read it, but somebody said something like the average American commits 3 felonies a day or something like that, violating laws that they don't even know were laws.
Well, that's the funny one during coronavirus when that first kicked off, is everybody in Virginia. In Virginia, you cannot wear a mask in public and carry a gun. It's a felony.
Mm-hmm.
With some reasonable caveats. Obviously, health reasons is one of those caveats, but everybody was flipping out. They're like, we can't do it. It's a felony.
Yeah.
Okay.
I got a lot of people emailing me on that one too. Like, oh my God, we can't do this. I'm like, they're just trying to take our right to concealed carry away. I'm like, hey, calm down. Read the law. I'm sure there's an out there somewhere. And a lot of legislators came back and said, no, you can. Alan Kelly says the bigger metropolitan areas are overriding the rural areas in voting ratio, and their demographic dictates the sway of the votes in Virginia. What say you?
I would say probably mathematically correct. I happen to be in one of those areas that's, it's probably not what most folks in the rest of the state would go along with. But I don't, I've heard that argument a lot where, like, oh, the urban centers are swaying the vote and this and that. And it's like, okay, those are people. Like, people can have their opinions and they can differ from my opinions. I don't really see the logic to that. It's like saying that somehow if you live closer together, your opinion is less valid than somebody who lives further apart. And it's kind of like a weird thing to me. I understand what he's saying. If most of the state geographically has one opinion about something and 3 cities have a different opinion about it, okay. But I mean, people are allowed to have different opinions than me, Well,
what's unique about America relative to other places in the world is, life in Miami is almost another world relative to what life is like here in rural East Tennessee. Mm-hmm. And rural East Tennessee is nothing like San Diego or Portland or New York, which really is, I'm not trying to be a statist, but in some ways it makes a great argument for local jurisdiction really setting the laws, because what works there won't necessarily work here. Would you agree or disagree?
No, I 100% agree with that. I mean, and that's the problem is my job in some ways is to take the tools I have, whether that's on my belt or the law, and solve some kind of problems. And most of those are, criminal related problems, but the government is doing that same exact thing. They're using the law that has been written to try to solve people's issues. And that just does not work everywhere. You know what I mean? I mean, I'll give you a funny example from our department has testing to become ranks and become supervisors and stuff. And because we are a large suburban department, it is not rural by any means. But there was like 20 questions on the test about like hunting questions, and like no one got those right up here. I mean, we don't deal with I don't know, like you can moose hunt in Virginia. I don't think there's moose in Virginia, and they're like, what about if you're like a 16-year-old like blind kid? Do you need a hunting license? It's like, hell if I know. I don't know. I don't deal with that. You know what I mean? But I can tell you how to investigate an embezzlement. That's probably a little more useful for my day to day.
Yeah. That's a great point. Yeah, that's a really good point. Jero says, problem with the law is it's up to a judge. That can be problematic. We saw that in the election. Gerald says, Portland used to be one of the top tourist destinations under 5 years ago. It is sad. Yeah, it's amazing what can happen in just a small amount of time. And we saw that. One of the things that's going on in Virginia I wanted to touch on is this concept of sanctuary cities, sanctuary towns. And at one point I saw something like 80-something% of the counties and cities inside of Virginia had passed some sort of sanctuary legislation. What are your thoughts on that?
I have some interesting viewpoints on that. One of the areas I regularly patrol is heavily Hispanic. Like some days I don't speak English on calls. The problem, and that this is a problem where you're talking about the difference between state and federal law. They can fix this problem. Like it's an easy problem to fix, especially for citizens that like Mexico, where it's so close to the U.S. They should give them like the de facto position for the government should be quick background check. Here's your work visa. Come in and work. Go back and forth across the border. That's fine. As long as you're not a felon or you're not been previously deported or violent, come work. Come pay taxes. And the other thing, too, is people just don't think about this from their perspective. Like, let's just say you lived in an incredibly impoverished country that honestly, like, say, look at some of the Central American companies that were put in those positions by the U.S. government. Why wouldn't you want to move your family to a place that even if you weren't legally there would be better off for you? Like you would probably make that same decision to do that. But you can't fix the issues that arise from allowing like large groups of people that aren't officially here. Like that's a problem. As local governments are trying to fix that problem on their level, they can't. They don't have the tools. The federal government has to fix that problem. And they could fix the problem. But the problem is I don't think they are willing to work together to solve that.
Interesting. Your point about, you're fleeing these economically depressed and maybe politically a lot of political unrest in these Central and South American countries, and they're fleeing to come to America. I saw a recent, very interesting thing where South Africa were having a lot of people running into their country from Zimbabwe and some other countries, Mozambique, Angola, Congo. So what South Africa did was, they're giving millions of dollars to these countries to pay white South African farmers to come up there and farm to improve those countries so that less people will want to flood into South Africa. So I'm like, that's an interesting idea, looking at improving the economic and living conditions in those countries so that people won't want to flee.
Well, the thing is and people don't really understand this, but the U.S. does these things too. And I remember the bill they were passing had a bunch of foreign aid and people didn't like the foreign aid in there. And I was like, you should ask why it's in there because it's probably cheaper to do this. And we do the same thing with agriculture. I mean, I remember when I was in Afghanistan, they sent like USAID and there's a couple other government agencies I never heard of. And they're literally farmers from like Kansas to being like, no, you got to put fertilizer on this field, like just telling them how to farm better. You know what I mean? And the U.S. already does a lot of that stuff and people don't hear about it because it's like kind of boring and no news media is going to cover that kind of stuff. But people should ask why those things are the place. I mean, sometimes it's just wasteful government spending, but sometimes, like you said, seems that way, but it's like, do you want to deal with that, or do you want to deal with an influx of people leaving those countries?
Yeah, I heard someone say one time, you can build schools or you can build prisons. So you choose what you do with your dollars, but you're going to end up building more of one or the other.
Well, that's honestly the real problem in a lot of very liberal cities, and we have some very liberal folks that are prosecuting in my area. And the problem is they want to let criminals off the hook because they don't want people in jail. I don't want people in jail either. But once they're criminals, that's where you go. You can't fix the problem by saying like, it really wasn't that bad. You know what I mean? I mean, Virginia keeps doing that too. There used to be like 3 years ago, I think maybe a little bit longer, but $200 like in a theft was a felony, which I don't necessarily agree with because that's kind of a more of a severe punishment than it needs to be. But now it's $1,000, and then many prosecutors won't even charge folks that are like serial like thefts and stuff like that. I mean, tens of thousands of dollars getting charged as a misdemeanor. It's like, this person's going to keep doing this. If you wanted to keep them out of jail, you would have tried to fix this problem 2 decades ago when this person was growing up. This person would have had some kind of opportunity not to do this kind of stuff. And I'm not absolving people of their choices because people make choices all the time. I know I see tons of, very poor, destitute folks that aren't criminals. They don't steal things. But it's just social psychology. If you're put in a situation where you have limited choices and more of those choices are criminal choices, you will pick those more often. You can't argue that.
Yeah, and we had John Hearn on last week, and John has done a lot of, he's got a master's in criminology and has done a lot of research on the subject. And if you're watching this morning and you haven't, check that out. Check it out because he talks about the data behind recidivism. And to your point, Jake, at some point, this person, I think the average person entering the California prison system committed 13 felonies the previous year or some ungodly number like that. It was just staggering.
Well, and that's the thing with a lot of police officers. They get this kind of like jaded view of the world because we deal with these people all the time. I've arrested people like multiple times, or like arrested dad, then arrested like son, and then like grandkid, and it's like, so you get this jaded view, but most people aren't like that. But the problem is it's a question of optimization. Have you optimized the prison system to keep people apart from the rest of the public, which is what it currently does? It's not optimized to keep them from recommitting crimes. And people, the only way to really do that is like give them education and job training. And people are like, we can't be doing that for prisoners. And I can kind of understand that viewpoint. If like I have to pay all this stuff, but I could just like stab somebody and then go get a college degree, like that doesn't really make a lot of sense. But it's a question of optimization. Do you want to keep them apart, or do you want to keep them from coming back? You got to pick, and you got to pay for whichever one you want.
Yeah, that was one of the really bizarre things that I saw repeatedly when I was a corrections officer before I went on the road. And that was how many people were in there because they committed a crime and wanted to get caught just so they could get health care. Mm-hmm. There was a guy that had hepatitis who committed, I think he robbed a Walmart. He stole a VCR. I'm dating myself. He stole the VCR with a plastic gun and said, I just stood there and I'm waiting for somebody to tackle me or do something because I needed a kidney or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, that's unfortunate. I've never seen one quite that severe, but I do see the one if the weather turns bad, they're like, I might be drunk. Maybe you should arrest me. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this one. Take you to the shelter, buddy. You don't necessarily have to go to the jail. I mean, there are other places.
Yeah, this one guy, he couldn't pay for his psych med, so he said, I'll walk down there and picked up a rock and threw it through the window and just stood there till the police came and arrested me because I needed my medication. I couldn't afford it. I'm like, which again, it's one of those things like I would have never, had I not worked in that environment and heard those stories over and over again, I would have probably never believed it, So when I hear these issues with healthcare, my ears kind of perk up a little bit. Let's see what we got here. Go ahead, sir.
I'd say that is a real issue. And, I'm kind of torn on it. I kind of generally default to, I don't think the government is very good at solving big problems like that. But in some ways, people are like, well, healthcare is not a right and all this stuff. And I'm like, it's not, but neither are good roads or an infrastructure or a good school system. None of those are rights written into the Constitution. But any good country should have those. So, and the other thing too is, and this too, is like anytime when you pick somebody up and they need health care and they can't pay for it, they're obligated to get it. Like if they're in my custody, they're getting some kind of health care. Now they're not getting something from Johns Hopkins, but if they get stabbed or something like that, they're getting surgery and someone's paying for that. And guess who that is?
Yeah.
You and me.
Yeah, that's right. Elke says, and every vote counts equally the same, e.g. the welfare single mom with 6 looking forward to Mitt Romney's gift of $3,000 per child per month counts as much as a soldier or a business owner's. Yeah. Mike Varley says, hard to vote against Santa Claus. Gerald says, even voters that are not living have the same value. Okay. Let's see here. JD, who's a retired FBI agent, says previously the intent behind the sanctuary concept was so illegal immigrants who were victims of crime would not be afraid they would be reported to immigration authorities if they went to the police to report the crime. Now it's being used to protect the criminal immigrants. Interesting.
That is a serious problem, and I completely understand. Like I said, most of the folks I work with is one of the worst ghettos in probably the state. And most folks are very good folks, but there's a large gang problem. And I've been to many shootings and stabbings where like happen right outside these people's door. You see anything? No. Were you home the whole time? Yeah. Okay. I mean, and I'll straight up tell them that, listen, I'm not immigration. I'm not going to deport you. You can tell me what happened, because if you don't, that same guy who stabbed this guy is going to be living next door for the next 3 years. So. But it's a problem. It's not, and that's the thing. They're like, we don't cooperate with ICE or whatever. All these cities are saying this stuff, and a lot of that times it comes down to funding. ICE isn't paying the jails to house people who haven't committed criminal crimes. Most of those are administrative detainers. They haven't committed a crime apart from just not leaving when they should have. So the states have to take that funding burden by housing those folks. So a lot of times it's not necessarily what the media is telling you. It's more of we don't have a budget and we don't have space to house people who really haven't committed any crimes. If you want to pay us, maybe they'll do it, but it's not what, most of the people are reporting.
Yeah. Another one of the sanctuary issues that I wanted to discuss with you is the concept of Second Amendment sanctuaries.
I saw that with Missouri.
Yeah. And a lot of, my state's considering that legislation, I believe. And of course, a lot of the stuff in your jurisdiction has gone that way. What are your thoughts on that? Is that necessary?
Well, I think you let the cat out of the bag when you allow local governments to defy federal policy, maybe for good reasons. But if you've allowed that to stand with no consequences, then that's the new standard. Then if I don't really want to do whatever federal law, I'm not going to do anymore. Some legislation or legislators are going to think of that. It is interesting, and personally, I'm not a huge fan of the NFA because I can tell you I have never run across a crime committed with a suppressor or a short-barreled weapon or a fully auto gun. I just don't know if there's any. That's one of those laws where if you could point to some, statistics or some data that says like, oh no, this keeps like 50,000 people a year from getting shot. Okay, maybe there's some utility in it, but my personal experience is I've not seen any utility in many of those kind of things apart from just, people thought they looked scary, so we shouldn't have them.
Yeah, I don't understand that either. TC says, any thoughts on HR 127 as it's currently written? I have not read the entire text of that. Some sort of licensing provisions. I'm not aware of that. Are you up on that, Jake?
No, I don't really follow a lot of that stuff, like proposed gun laws. I'm more interested in what actually gets passed, but no, I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, I'll have to read it. I can't speak on it well either. Gerald says, from the border of Mexico all the way up I-5 to Canada, sanctuary. Wow, yeah. This idea that I want to touch back on something you said a moment ago when you were talking about once you allow states and local agencies, jurisdictions to completely defy federal law without consequences. This is something that's really new and unique. And I don't think people realize how probably unique it is, where you have isn't marijuana is still like a class 1?
Schedule 1, yeah.
Schedule 1, yeah, I'm sorry.
Which is completely ridiculous, to be perfectly honest with you. Is like, and that's the problem. I understand why states are doing this, because they're getting hamstrung by the federal government, who is unwilling or incapable of changing laws that no longer apply or have been shown to be detrimental to people for no benefit. You look at crack and cocaine being treated differently. They're the same thing. Like, things like that need to be fixed. I'm personally not a big fan of marijuana, but I tell you what, I've never been to a domestic violence call where the guy was like high off his gourd and then violent. I've been to a million calls where a guy was drunk and being belligerent and violent, and seen some terrible stuff as a result of people drinking too much. So while I don't personally approve of that, I don't do it. And I don't really like it. And I wouldn't be happy if my kid did it. It's not for me or the government to say what you can and can't do if it's not hurting someone else, especially when there's substances that are completely legal that cause way more problems, and if the federal government can't take that off, can't legalize that, then you're going to force states to use common sense and be like, we are putting people in jail for something that is like less. Like, you can't overdose on weed, but you can on alcohol.
Yeah.
So yeah, the feds are not being responsive. They're not doing anything. And then the state governments are being like, well, we'll do something. And then now this precedent has been set that they could do whatever they want because the feds don't do anything about it.
Yeah, I think that's my concern. The precedent has been set. And where do we go from here? I mean, what other federal laws will go, yeah, we're just not going to do that.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to say. And I think eventually someone's going to try something a little crazy. Like, I would be very surprised if they're actually allowed to violate federal gun laws or not enforce federal gun laws. I'd be surprised if that gets passed without some kind of someone being like, well, guess what? No funding for your roads now, Because like intermittent, I remember there was a story a couple of years ago where it was like Berkeley tried to kick out the Marine recruiting office, and the feds were just like, guess what? No federal aid now, So I think someone's going to try that, and then it's eventually not going to work out. But the problem is the federal government's not functioning correctly, and they need to do a better job.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. Like, I saw that in my years in recruiting where we'd have a registrar, a very liberal registrar that would like, this kid has joined the Marine Corps. We need his transcripts to submit to make sure that he's on track to graduate high school and ship to recruit training. I'm not going to give you the registration. Like, well, here's a letter from the parents. Like, I don't care. I don't believe what you're doing. Well, let me introduce you to something called the Solomon Act. And let me explain to you what's going to happen to you in this school if you do not do this. And of course they would comply, but it was always really adversarial. But yeah, I mean,
the problems are they're just straight ignorance on those parts. The problem is if you don't like that organization, why would you try to keep your students out of it? If you have any kind of faith and ability in your educational institution to teach people what they need to know, then why would you keep them out of that? And the same thing in law enforcement. Like, we shouldn't go be a cop. And it's like, well, don't you want people that are other than, you think everybody is one certain way, they're all conservatives or Republicans or whatever. Well, don't you want people that aren't those in those agencies to maybe balance it out if that's what you think? But they never seem to make that leap.
No. I guess this is a good segue to talk about, what with the current unrest going on in the world. This is one of the things I've been asking Jake, all of our guests for the past year. What is this, what we've seen in the last year? I guess, what has it taught us about the nature of conflict, whether that's conflict management, et cetera? What have you seen?
Well, I think we've seen a lot of places that are not very good at it. We've seen other places that are decent at it. And to be honest with you, most of those issues it's just like being a Marine officer. You sometimes have to make hard decisions that are unpopular. Like, the reason why those Portland riots are continuing is because nobody put them down when they should have initially. If they would have used a reasonable amount of force to do that, they would not continue. And the other problem is people don't understand. They just really don't understand their rights. They feel like if they have they feel strongly about something and they feel like it's an injustice, and it could possibly be that they are then justified in doing whatever they want, and no one can stop them. And that's the problem. I mean, you see all these videos where, people are getting arrested. Like, you can't arrest me. Like, no, I can arrest you. Like, you're clearly violating the law. Like, you just destroyed that business and you burn it down. Like, you're going to jail now, But you can't. But then that is the problem. People just don't want to hold that kind of stuff accountable. there has to be accountability when you do those kind of things, because then you're teaching people there is no consequences for those actions and there really is no rule of law. But I think honestly, most of this is probably, I'd say like 70% COVID related stress from people. Living the way we've had to live for the last year and a half or so, that's put a lot of stress on people, more so than they would think. And I think, you put that with some of these events we saw over the summer, it just kind of pushed them over the edge. I think if you took COVID away, it probably wouldn't have been what it was. So I think it's kind of I wouldn't necessarily make any big changes to policy or how we do things because it is an outlier year. And I don't think you can make any good decisions based on outliers.
I think to your point though, when the police pull back, you create that void, and then you have someone like Kyle Rittenhouse step into that void. Like, well, if the law isn't going to do something about these people that are burning and looting, then the average citizen, look, I got to step into the breach. And we saw it with the LA riots with the Korean grocery store owners and stuff like that. And of course, we saw it across the country, which again goes to your point of we have to stand the line. I would submit. What do you think?
Well, I would think to be honest, I understand those frustrations, but I would encourage folks, like the Kyle Rittenhouse thing is a perfect example of things I see all the time. It's several bad decisions led to something that's not going to be good for anybody. Like, even if he's found guilty or not guilty, like, this isn't going to be good for him. Let's say he comes out not guilty. Like, he's going to be millions of dollars in debt. He's going to probably have a hard time getting a job or going to a school. So, and that's the problem. A lot of folks, I think, they spend a lot of time, especially in the self-defense world, trying to, become proficient with skill sets. I want to do BJJ. I want to get in shape and shoot well. And that, fine. I would never discourage you from doing that, but you also have to understand when you should use that and if it's a good idea. And to be honest with you, a 17-year-old kid with an AR in basically a city that's more or less lawless is the dumbest idea I've ever heard of. There's a reason why they don't give Marines weapons all the time on base. Like, they're locked up in the armory. We don't just give 18-year-old Marines like, hey, carry your machine gun and go out in town and do whatever you want. Like, but dumb stuff is going to happen. And they've theoretically been trained not to do those kind of things. So, if you give somebody who has no training, is a young man, and feels very strongly about something, like, nothing good's going to come of that, whether it's legal or not. It's like people they don't think about those consequences. They just think about, like, well, that's legal, I can do it. And you're like, yeah, but are you going to feel happy about shooting those 3 people for the rest of your life? Like, you may have saved your life or saved someone else's, but there's an aftermath, and I get to see it, and most folks don't, and people don't think about that.
No, they don't. And you know what? It's going back to your emphasis on fitness on Tier 3 tactical, and we have said it a million times over the past 5 or 6 years of the American Warrior Show. The best gadget you can buy for your gun is a gym membership for you.
Yeah.
Because physical fitness is often overlooked in the self-defense community, but what's really overlooked is conflict resolution skills, the ability to talk and de-escalate. I mean, that is almost non-existent, and it shouldn't be, because that is everything. Do you really want to spend the next several years going through the court system and draining your friends and family and your personal wealth dry just because you use a certain level of force that you thought was really cool? Or I don't know what it is, man.
Well, the problem is there's an interesting study. I wrote an article a year or two ago, and I thought it was going to be more popular, but it turns out gun guys don't like to read this article. It was a study where they looked at real scenarios where they did a large telephone survey of people who had involved in using firearms for self-defense. And it was completely anonymous, so there's no issue of you may have been reporting a crime. And things that were obviously crimes, like robberies, were not included in the study. So they included, they did thousands of phone calls and people who, said that they pulled a gun to stop a burglar or a car thief or to defend themselves from a robbery, whatever it was. They include these people in there. Then they typed like a summary of each one, and they turned it over to a panel of judges. And they said, rate the probable legality of these persons' actions, and about 50% were illegal.
Mm-hmm.
That's the problem, is you can carry a gun, but do you know when you should use it? That's the other problem, is we don't spend in this community, we don't spend enough time worrying about that kind of stuff. Like was it Cooper says, like carrying a gun, or like, it's like no different than having a piano and saying you're a pianist. Like, it doesn't work that way. You need to know when you're going to use it and in what situations. And like you said, to the conflict resolution, like if you could just let some guy call you an asshole and then be like, yeah, well, you're probably right. See you, buddy. Without resorting to like, well, hey, you can't say that to me. And then it escalates. I mean, there was I don't know if you saw, there's a crazy video in Pennsylvania someone sent me yesterday. And it's like these two guys yelling across the street in the snow. They're arguing about like shoveling snow and cursing each other out and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden it turns into a gunfight. Guy goes back in his house, gets a rifle, and then kills two people, like out in the middle of the street. And it's just like, you could have stopped that by just not saying that stupid stuff.
No, I hadn't seen that, man. You'll have to send me that. That's crazy.
It's crazy. I'm surprised. I was like, I'm surprised they showed this whole video. This is really violent.
Wow. Yeah. Gerald just commented on here, law of self-defense. And that's one of the things that when we do Warrior Week, we bring out Andrew Branca, and that's day one, class one, before we get into any of the sexy stuff or the shooting or the gun grappling or the edge weapon stuff or the less lethal. You have to know when and why and how you can use what level of force. And if you don't know, Rory Miller said it best, and I've quoted him 1,000 times. If you don't train in the context of the lawful use of force, all you're doing is training yourself to go to prison, period.
That's 100% right. And I see that a lot where folks are like, well, he's stealing my car, so I'm going to pull my gun on him. It's like, nope. I wouldn't recommend that. Like, you may be found not guilty by a jury, but do you really want to go through the 3 years of court dates and trials and attorneys to go find that out? Probably not.
Yeah, and that's I think Tiny commented on that. He said, activist prosecutors know the process is the punishment in many cases, and that is so true. Recently, I've seen several uses of force that were relatively clear cut just from the multiple angles and what you could read on it. Like, okay, well, I hate to say it. I mean, it's tragic, but it's a good shooting. But they're still going to drag this guy through the mud just to bleed him dry.
Well, it's like that Atlanta one where the DA's office said a taser was a lethal device the week prior. Then like, oh, no, it's not.
All right.
If it's in someone else's hand, no, it's not. And it's like, well, and the thing is I don't like to see those kind of things either, because that directly impacts my profession. But the problem is that those kind of things are gradually going to get reined in, because those prosecutors are going to get sued. You can't do that kind of stuff. It's illegal. He is violating the law by charging somebody he knows or does not have the requisite legal threshold charge. Like, that is illegal to do that. You're going to be sued for prosecutorial malpractice, and those localities are going to pay out big time for that kind of stuff. And it all comes down to the budget. When you have no budget and you've cost the city $500 million this year, and basically the equivalent of malpractice lawsuits, you're going to have a hard time continuing that kind of stuff. But it takes a while for that to happen.
Yeah. And the next question, Jake, is where is all this lawlessness going? And specifically, what can the average person do? Because, we're a self-defense podcast, we're a self-defense channel, we're a self-defense community, and, you can't carry a law enforcement officer everywhere with you. So the optimum word is self-defense. So what can the average person do if we see more in 2021 of what we saw in 2020?
Well, I think if you've learned anything, you don't have time to learn these skills when things are bad. And I'll give you a perfect example of why even being able to carry a law enforcement officer all the time or having one nearby isn't necessarily going to help you out a whole bunch. Just a few weeks ago, had a armed commercial robbery. Guy walks in, robs a store, puts guns in these clerks' face. I got dispatched to that. I was 2 blocks away, and I had no traffic issues, nothing. I got there immediately, within probably 15 seconds of getting the notification. That robbery still took place 6 minutes prior to there. So they were gone before I even got there. So given optimal, everything was perfect. I was already on the road I needed to be on to get there. got dispatched, knew exactly where it was. I just drove there and got there, but they were gone. It takes time to call the dispatch. It takes time for them to figure out what you're saying because you're screaming into the phone, and it takes time for them to send that out to us. And that's the best case scenario. You've got 6 minutes by yourself. And we're a well-funded, like very, very well-trained agency, like very good organization. And in places that are rural or places that don't have that level of funding, like it's not going to get any better. So you have to be able to take care of yourself. You need to know the law so you can do that professionally and not put yourself and your family in further jeopardy after the fact. So I think, AWS is one of those things. There's not very many places on the internet that I regularly recommend folks go check out because just a lot of it's kind of cringy on the internet where they're just doing it for clicks, and it's a business. I get it, but there aren't that many places where they actually genuinely care about trying to help folks out, which is why I tell, like recommend the podcast or send them over to AWS. But they need to learn those skills now. I mean, was it like the best time to plant a tree is like 20 years ago and the second best time is now? Like, it's the same thing for that. You got to learn those skills. You should be able to protect yourself. You don't need to be like a DevGuru guy to be able to do this either. Most of the skills you can acquire, like, they don't take that long. They aren't that hard to acquire. You don't have to be doing this as a full-time job, but some amount of work is going to be required if you want to be able to protect yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Alan Kelly says, being on the LE side, I saw many that, if they had used lethal force, would have been in deep trouble by not knowing the elements of self-defense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's usually the case. People use a gun, point a gun, whatever, to compel someone else's conduct. And again, just like you just committed aggravated assault at a minimum. And I was like, I can't do that.
Nope.
And there's no excuse for not knowing it. The information's out there. Elkie Monroe says, good points, Jake. As always, asked guess what is your EDC when you're not in uniform?
Mine is, and I'll explain exactly why it's this. I carry a SIG 239, which is not a popular carry gun. But the reason I carry it is because my duty gun is also a SIG and has the same exact controls and is the same caliber. And I happen to shoot this gun fairly well. So I'm not saying by any means you should carry that or it is the best carry gun for someone to carry. In terms of carry guns, I see this a lot with folks that like rotate their carry guns. And I'm like, why are you doing that? Like, that's not a good thing for you to do. It's making it harder for you to defend yourself should you have to do that. You have a different sight presentation. It's going to be your holster's in a different spot. You don't need those variables whenever you're staring down the barrel of a gun or you're seeing some guy like beat the crap out of someone on the street. Like, that's not what you need to be worrying about. Like, which gun do I have and where's my holster and all that kind of stuff. So I do that and I carry that gun because I know the controls are the same. So I don't have to think about like, oh, where's the mag release? Where's the slide stop, that kind of stuff. It's the exact same. I don't have to think about those things. So then I can think about fixing whatever problem. But in terms of like EDCs that I recommend for most folks, I actually wouldn't recommend that. It's kind of a lower capacity gun and I'm not a big fan of 40 caliber, but it is what it is. I'm kind of constrained by what I can carry as a part of my departmental regulations, but people worry too much about that kind of stuff. Find a gun that has decent capacity, 8 rounds or more. I would probably, a 9 mil is probably good. And then actually practice with it and make sure it's a reliable gun. People spend way too much time on the minutia of like, well, do I need these night sights and, maybe this base pad or, it's like, just get a gun and practice with it and carry it in a safe manner and you're going to be fine.
Yeah. Anything else? Any other equipment?
Just the normal stuff you carry. I do carry a zero tolerance ZT350 knife, but I carry it for a duty knife and just when I'm out and about. That one I like in particular. And I would recommend that one for folks. But check your local laws. I don't know if it's legal in all 50 states with the blade length. I think it is. It's not that long, but check that out first. It's nice because it's one of the assisted knives, but it's got like a little tooth on the edge of the blade that you actually use to flip it out. And that way, also if you have to push it into something, like if you're cutting into a car door or a piece of drywall or something like that, you can't shove your hand over the blade, which is a real problem whenever, especially if your hands get slippery or something like that. So I like that knife. The handle's comfortable and you can't really cut yourself very badly if you have to use it in an aggressive way. So I would recommend that for folks. Check it out. Zero Tolerance makes really good stuff.
We have an AWS member who's a London police officer, and he wrote a really good article. I asked him, I said, what do you EDC as a London cop? What can you? Because they can't carry their firearm off duty, believe it or not.
Bunch of hard biscuits, probably.
Yeah. Well, it was actually a really good article. I encourage everybody to look at it. But the first thing he put on that list was he's like, he's a MMA guy, BJJ guy, and he says, the first thing I EDC every single day is every hour I have in the gym, every hour that I've been on my mouth guard and been in the ring, and all the time under, with a weight belt on and doing pull-ups and all this kind of stuff. And I really like that answer, but because a lot of people in our community, especially here in America, maybe it's because we're, a capitalistic, materialistic culture, we think to the gear and the gadget before we think of the soft skills or maybe in some sense the hard skills. But really, that is what you EDC every day. It's the 6 inches between your ears. It's all the training and all the schools you've been to, all the times that you've had to, calm a situation down or use your ground intelligence officer skills to, create a MET-T of the current situation or whatever. Mm-hmm. More so than whatever SIG. And I'm sure if Phil Strader's still on here, he's very happy to hear you talk about SIG since he works for SIG and designs SIG firearms.
Oh, SIG, he just sent me like a Venmo for like $20 to say that. He's like, you better mention that.
I wouldn't be surprised.
I'm just kidding. But no, I like SIG stuff. But yeah, you're completely right about that. And I would say, because I do talk about fitness a lot, don't really underestimate the fitness. I would say that's, if you're looking at like a pyramid of skills, that's probably the base. You could, I don't think you do this, but theoretically, let's say I could give you like black belt BJJ skills, but if you were like incredibly out of shape, like you're probably not even going to be in the kind of shape to execute most of them, if any of them. And I can tell you, having, been in a few physical confrontations myself and seeing people who are not in particularly good shape or particularly strong, this is not scientific, so do not quote me on this, but I think it probably takes 50% more skill to overcome like 20% more strength, because skills do matter. And we've all seen those videos where, some big guy gets his butt kicked by a guy who's good at BJJ, but, being strong also matters too. Like if you could pick that guy up and slam him on the ground, there's no amount of arm barring that's going to get you out of that situation. So there's a reason why there are weight classes in MMA and all fighting disciplines, because that stuff does matter. So don't just spend all your time going to rolling on the mat and being like, I'm good, no one can get me.
Yeah, I agree. There's a balance in there, man. We had I train at two different gyms. One is we do gi, and then the other place we do no gi. And the one that we do no gi, it's a 10th Planet system. It's right next door to a real meathead gym. Mm-hmm. And this one dude comes in there, big, good looking kid. He's a corrections officer here at a large state facility. And he's fixing to go on the road. And he's like, yeah, I've paid for like 6 months of training here. It's my first night here. I'm like, hey man, glad to have you. And he was similar in size to me. So, okay, man, we'll train together. And he's just a giant, just a real stout guy. Well, at the end of it, it's time to roll. And this 15-year-old kid who's like a 3-stripe white belt, and the big guy picks him because he's one of the smaller guys in the class. And that kid choked him out 5 times in a 5-minute round. Mm-hmm. And there was nothing the dude could do. I mean, it wasn't even like he got gassed out and submitted. I mean, he was just getting his ass kicked.
That happens. I did a course my department put on. It's basically BJJ for cops, but it's actually a pretty good course. One of the Gracies, I think, teaches, but and we had a guy come in, and I'm a strong guy. Like I'm pretty strong and in good shape. And one of the instructors that came in was from a local gym. He was helping out the officers who are the instructors. And we just did a drill where he started on top, and like not a thing I could do to get him off of me. He wasn't even doing anything. He just staying on top. I was like, I can bench press your whole weight. I don't know why I can't get you off of me. Like squat double your weight. I cannot move them off of my hips, And so the skills do matter 100%. So I'm not trying to say like if you can bench press big time, you don't have to practice any skills.
Yeah. And again, I think whether I'm going to talk about Elkie Monroe says I carry, this is what Elkie says. He said, I carry an IFAC, or he says, carry an IFAC, question mark. Matt Little of Graybeard Actual said something surprising a couple of days ago. He doesn't carry one because he's always close to one in his car, office, house, etc. And the chances of needing it outweigh the discomfort of carrying one.
I would say so here's the thing. People don't want to hear this. Like all this tourniquet stuff. Tourniquets are useful for one thing, hemorrhage control on limbs.
Mm-hmm.
To be perfectly honest with you, civilians are not likely to encounter that kind of an injury. And I'll give you some data behind it. I can't remember the study, but I wrote another article like this where they looked at all active shooter events from like 2010 to like 14. There were obviously several hundred victims or more. Not one of them died because of uncontrolled hemorrhaging from their limbs. Most people are shot in their torso. It's hard to shoot somebody in their limbs. And if you do, the chances of you hitting a big artery that it's going to be the cause of your death is actually pretty low. It matters for law enforcement and military because we're wearing body armor that covers our torso. Obviously, you can't tourniquet a neck, although maybe sometimes you want to tourniquet someone's neck. But so if you're covering those vital areas, you're by definition not likely to suffer those kind of injuries. So a tourniquet does make sense because any injury you do have would be to a place where you could probably apply a tourniquet, unless it's to your pelvis or something like that. So a tourniquet I'm never going to say don't know how to use a tourniquet or don't know how to apply it, but guys who carry like 1 or 2 tourniquets all the time, it's an odds game. Like your chance of running into that kind of injury, very, very low. And I've seen it on traffic accidents, and that's probably like your best chance of actually using it. But to be honest with you, like carrying an IFAC's okay, but if you don't know what a chest seal is or how to use one, you're way worse off because you're, as a civilian, not wearing body armor. You're much more likely to come into contact with something that's inside, your heart lung area or in your abdomen. And if you're looking at, an intestine sticking out of your gut going, do I poke this back in or do I put a tourniquet on it or what do I do? Like, that's not the time to hope you knew what a chest seal is or what to do in those kind of situations. So carry an IFAC if you want, but don't think that tourniquet's not magic. It doesn't fix all medical problems,
Yeah. We're going to have a guest on maybe next week. Name is Paul, and he's a law enforcement officer as well, former Army officer. And he was officer of the year because he had 2 tourniquet saves in like 2 weeks. So, I mean, he's the outlier, and we'll hear his story here in a week or so. But to your point, though, it is statistically highly unlikely. And I couldn't agree with what you said. I mean, more. It's not going to be a fix-all. I think there's an over-reliance on it. If you don't know how to use a chest seal, you need to figure it out because you're far more unlikely to see that as a concealed carrier.
Like I would recommend having some kind of like quick clot or some kind of impregnated dressing. It'd be much more useful because here's the other thing with the tourniquet. You know what else works really well? Pressure on the wound. Like that's step one. Whenever you come across somebody who's got like a spurting, let's say leg wound, put pressure on it to stop it from bleeding, and then you can apply a tourniquet. But if you're just in an accident or somebody, a construction accident and something happened like that, and you happen to see it, I mean, obviously there's a chance of, you could get a bloodborne pathogen or something like that, but you can also just grab the wound, hold it shut, or put your knee on it to hold it shut. It's going to control the bleeding better than nothing. So you also got to realize it's like you're saying, it's the skills that matter, not necessarily the equipment, because you could have the best soft T tourniquet or cat T or whatever. And then you're like, well, I put it on. Like, well, you put it on loose and you put it on like an inch below the, where you should have put it on. And now it doesn't work. But the basics of just putting pressure on someone, knowing how to deal with basic, first aid, like that's going to help you out a lot more than carrying the best equipment and stuff that like SF guys are carrying overseas.
And that goes for anything, firearms, knives, I don't care what it is. If you don't know how to use it, I mean, I see this again and again. I've this training calendar this year, I'll be all over the country, and I'm going to see probably the same thing I see year in and year out. Yeah, I'm thinking about getting this upgraded. I'm going to send this off to the gunsmith. I'm going to have so-and-so build this for me. And I'm like, you can't shoot, bro. What are you doing?
How about work on your grip first?
Yeah. And to your point, I'm going to go back to your point about why does they rotate out ADC firearms? One of the questions came out last night. One of the things we do, Jake, for our American Warrior Society members, as well as American Competitive Shooting Society members, is we do Zoom sessions each week. And there was a gentleman on there last night. He says, once he hits a certain, whether an IDPA expert or sharpshooter or something like that, he will go into the next category from enhanced service pistol to SSP or to CDP or some other division. And Mike is like, why are you doing that? Why not master one thing? And then when you plateau with that, after you've mastered it, then maybe go into something else. But I don't understand why a lot of people in our community do that.
Well, I think it's a hobby thing, and I get that too, because I shoot, USPSA, and it's the same thing. Oh, this new division now allows this or that, so I'm gonna build a red dot gun, or I'm gonna do it's like, and I'm not judging you. If you want to compete in whatever division you want to, that's fine, but don't tell yourself that it's like you're gonna be better off self-defense wise, because I mean, if you have two different types of, like, I see this with especially guys who shoot SIG and then Glocks. And it's like the first couple of presentations you shoot with the Glock, the like sights are like way up in the air because the grip angle is completely different between the two. So it's like, that's why you need to stick with one. You can practice with multiple, but do you want to put in the hours of work so you can do that? Like if you want to, okay, but don't delude yourself,
Yeah. Phil Strader is back on. He says, Rich, if you ever have a show about out of shape has-beens with minimal warrior skills and questionable shooting skills, call me. Phil, I got to get you on, man. That would be a hoot. If you're up for it, brother, I'd love to have you on because we'd have a lot of fun. Tony says, I was a paramedic for 14 years, never used a tourniquet, but a lot of chest seals and needle chest decompression. Yeah.
And that's the thing is folks don't need to know how to like do needle chest decompression or stuff like that, but just knowing that like, hey, don't stuff gauze in someone's abdomen injury. Just hold pressure on it and call 911. You can hold pressure on a wound for 5 or 10 minutes, you'll be fine. And, see basic CPR, like that's going to be more useful than, these kind of situations. And you really have to run the statistics. Like the chances of you needing a tourniquet are like about the same as you getting hit by lightning. And I don't see anybody carrying a lightning rod around as their EDC,
Yeah, I used to say that, being carrying a firearm is like carrying around one of those valves to turn off your water main. I mean, when you need it, you really need it. When you've got a burst pipe in the house and water spraying everywhere, you need that key like now. So I've got it in a certain place in the house. Everybody knows where it is. I've walked everybody out in the yard, showed them how to shut it off. But it's just for those really, really, really rare instances when unfortunately, that's the only thing that's going to solve the problem.
Yep.
Phil says, thank you for your service, by the way, Jake. Hope to be down your way shooting this year.
I hope we do a lot more shooting this year too, because a lot of matches were canceled. That wasn't so much fun, but thank you, Phil.
Yeah. Any final comments, Jake? I've kept you on here an hour and a half so far, brother. Anything else?
No, it was good to be on here. And like I said, I just, if you like some of the stuff we've been talking about today, just head over to Tier 3 and check it out. It's just TIER 3 spelled out tactical.com. Check it out. Got a ton of articles up at this point, and then any of those articles you can join our email list and we'll just send them to you. I do one about once a week and stuff like that. So that's probably the best place to follow me, or we're on YouTube now, and I do a little bit of Instagram, which is mainly terrible memes, but you can follow us there, check it out if you like it. And it was good talking to you, Rich.
Yeah, good talking to you, brother. If you have time for one more question, Gerald says one of the things we normally ask on Coffee with Rich, and I should have sent it to you last night, is best day, worst day.
So just what's my best day and what's my worst day?
Yeah, as far as like in your career or your personal, professional life, what has been like your best day and what was your worst day?
Well, best day, I mean, that's the easy one. That's when my kid was born. That's going to be an easy best day there. Worst day, it's hard to say because it kind of, after a while, they kind of all run together. Oh, I could tell probably the worst. The funniest thing is most cops think the worst thing is like going to a hot call or you might die or you might have to shoot somebody. Like, that is no doubt stressful. Like, okay, I'm a block away and they've got guns. Like, this is going to be real sporty. But the worst thing actually, I think for us is probably a no notice death notification. I had to go to a hospital for the area. It was out of jurisdiction. They needed somebody to notify this nurse that her mother had died. It was not expected. It was a suicide, unfortunately, but it was, it wasn't like somebody died of a disease they had when there's at least some expectation that might happen. But no, that's probably the worst. I hate doing those the most because you're just like ruining that person's next couple of months with what you're telling them, basically. So that's probably going to be the worst day.
Yeah. And best day?
Best day? Oh, that's another easy one. We were doing we had a PT test was it a year ago now or a little over a year ago, and one of the guys had like a freak heart attack and just keeled over on the run. And fortunately, we had several medics there running with us, and we had the right equipment and stuff. But we had to give him CPR and load him up in an ambulance. And I guess the doctor said he had about a 5% chance to live. But luckily, we had guys who were EMT certified and things like that. So the first aid we were able to provide him was nice to be able to save a teammate, because most of the time when I do CPR, it doesn't really work out that well. But in that case, it did, even though he had a fairly a poor chance of surviving. He survived with no issues and still working and in great shape. And his kid made a little like painting for me, and I keep it up on my wall. And I was like, I like that award much better than anything I ever got from the Marine Corps or the department. So that's probably the best day.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Jake. And please check out Tier 3 Tactical. You can find a link to Jake's business here on the show notes today. Jake, thanks again for all that you've done for this nation and for your community, man. I really appreciate it, brother.
Well, thanks for having me on. It was good talking to you.
Yeah, same here, buddy. And remember, folks, the fight is coming. Be ready.